Good afternoon and welcome to our session. My name is Nikos Tedes and I'm the chair of the Association of People Living with HIV. As it is very well known, people who use drugs are at very high risk of being exposed to HIV. In Greece, we had been lucky for many years when the situation among people who use drugs was and the exposure to HIV was quite high. Greece was excluded. And actually, what happened to Greece is a cautionary tale for what happens when harm reduction programs and policies are not kept in place and in scale, and when drug policies are not looked after. In 2011 and 12, we had an outbreak, which was one of the biggest outbreaks of HIV in people who use drugs ever witnessed in the world. At that time, my colleague, who I will pass on and who will be our main presenter today, our only presenter, Marios Atzemis, and who will also present some of the activities that he's pursuing at the European level, besides Greece. It was the time when we met because he was unfortunately exposed to HIV, and he came to our organization, became a member, and very soon a very active member. The Association of People Living with HIV, we operate in what we call the GPA principle, which stands for Greater Involvement of People Living with HIV, and the affected communities, which are part of our families, which includes people who are sex workers, migrant and refugees, gay men, people who are incarcerated. All of these groups are members, and our principle is that we ourselves, we speak with our own voice. And therefore, Marios became one of the most active advocates and people offering assistance to our colleagues. So I pass on to Marios to speak about the work that we have been doing and what his personal tale shows in how we can become from individuals to active citizens and active members of organizations. Mario, to you.
Cheers, Nikos. Thanks a lot. I hope you can hear me well. I'm Marios Atzemis. I'm the Harm Reduction Officer, Positive Voice, the Greek Association of People Living with HIV, also strongly engaged in European networks regarding drug policy and HIV, like I'm the steering committee member of AIDS Action Europe. I'm representing the European AIDS Treatment Group in Civil Society Forum on Drugs, and also I'm a board member of the Drug Policy Network of Southeast Europe. Above all, I'm a devoted peer worker and a proud member of the drug user community. Okay, so let's start. Usually, first of all, I don't have a PowerPoint. Usually it's one-man show. It's a storytelling, and I don't need any kind of images with me. Usually I start my stories from the HIV outbreak between 2011 2013. I decided today to move a step back. It was 2009 when, without having any other options, and I can explain that, I went to a tough love, rock bottom community, a rehab. What I experienced there is kind of really of beyond description right now, and it will take hours to explain this madness. After 1 year of humiliations, inhumane treatment, and constant shaming, I was finally, quote unquote, released from there. It was around 2010, the beginning of the outbreak, but we didn't know back then, at that point, what was going on. It was also a historical moment for Greece, a condition of a continuous emergency, of a constant emergency. The economy crashed, harsh austerity measures imposed, and the International Monetary Fund literally took over control of our lives. That affected every single aspect of everyday life, and thus also affected the harm reduction services. Severe budget cuts brought a major disruption to needle exchange and needle distribution services, not to mention that the waiting list for the OST treatment was no less than 7 years. I carried inside me back then an enormous amount of anger due to the debasement I was imposed to that tough love program, and the equally enormous amount of grief for my mother's loss. I started using again, and since every one of us was very ill informed about HIV, I did not hesitate to share my works just after I washed them with cold water. After some months, my father died as well, and it was exactly the same period when I started noticing that people that I knew for many years in the open drug scenes of Athens mentioned, usually in a hesitant manner, that they were exposed to HIV. A cloud of anxiety, of fear, of grief, and emotional pain started hanging over me. After a while, I took the decision to get tested, but already I knew the answer. But of course, it was a devastating moment, to tell you the truth. A close friend of mine advised me to get in touch, to communicate with people that are living with HIV already, and to make specific questions to them about their way of living, their quality of life, about the medication, etc., etc. That was my first meeting, actually, with Positive Voice and with my future colleagues and friends. Some while after, my childhood friends helped me to move from that apartment and join another rehab, totally different than the previous one. Finally, I made it to an inpatient structure and then to the social reintegration stage. The two rehabs had major differences, chaotic differences in a way, but one thing, one specific thing in common: did not mention measures of harm reduction at all, not even naloxone. It was really beyond their narrative. When harm reduction was mentioned as a term from the staff working there, it was done in a very derogatory way, as something that encourages drug use and drug culture, whatever drug culture meant to them. After the program, had many contacts with people I knew from Positive Voice and finally became a volunteer. Not long after that, Nikos came up with a professional suggestion to be part as a peer worker to a harm reduction project. I said yes, because one of my dreams during the integration phase was to be part of that collectivity, of the HIV Positive Association of Greece collectivity. But inside me, I felt really confused. OST, needle exchange, drug consumption rooms, all the things that taught me they were wrong, now that I had to advocate for. I literally felt at that moment that I was allying with the devil. People from the association encouraged me to have specific trainings and to read as much as I could for the history, the meaning, and the strategies of harm reduction, and so I did. At the same period, epidemiologists, the Greek CDC, and the civil society organizations that intercepted the HIV outbreak in injecting drug users through a snowball project called Aristotle proved that the outbreak was a direct result of the budget cuts in harm reduction services in Athens. That was my first harsh realization. The second one was that after a night with countless tequila shots with my friends in a local hangout, I went out and I used heroin by injection after 3 years of abstinence. You can easily imagine what happened. And I was saved from naloxone, a substance nobody talked about it in the rehabs I had been. That was the second hard realization. After a while, throughout the context of mutual peer support, I met a big number of drug users in the streets, in the office, in our checkpoint, in our street work, in all the other structures of our association. I saw myself in them, vulnerable human beings, exhausted from social exclusion, stigmatization, poverty, incarceration, mental health conditions that untreated, homelessness, and blood-borne infections. Everywhere they went, especially in the substance-free treatments, were treated with the most horrible way, with the most horrible manner. Nowhere they could find kindness, support, respect, and a humane attitude. I remembered a phrase that haunted me, a phrase that I heard in one of the Correlation European Harm Reduction Network educational seminars we had. That harm reduction is when you meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. Working in various projects with so vulnerable and deprived from human dignity people, not only I got the answers I was looking for regarding the value and the real essence of harm reduction, but I evolved as a human being. My major realization is that harm reduction is not something that you learn from manuals, from seminars, from workshops or books, but you learned it the hard way, working with your peer group in a hostile environment full of prejudice and social exclusions, in a society that stigmatizes you and eliminates you finally if you lack a supportive network. And I have to admit that although it is tough, also I feel great being part of that supportive network for my peers and not only for them. After many years in the field and after all these projects and so many people I met, finally I managed to pan out to the fields of drug policy and HIV and drug user advocacy. Every problem I experienced, I tried to transform it to a suggestion for better and more humane drug policies towards the vulnerable, so we can confront the stereotypes that talking about lost cases, hygienic bombs, and thugs that care for nothing except their fix. In a heavily impaired societal context from the austerity years and the pandemic, in a deteriorating national health system, in a landscape of prejudice and social racism, we are, as harm reduction peer workers, we are advocating sometimes successfully, sometimes not, for the meaningful involvement of people who use drugs in the design and the implementation of policies, projects, and services which are directly affect our lives. With yellow journalists that represent us as objects deprived from any kind of humane properties and residence committees that demand our eternal incarceration, we are defending our human rights and our access to health. In a desensitized world, we are still struggling for dignity, compassion, love, and respect. We are still struggling for the obvious, to meet people where they are, and for the abolishment of the means of the social exclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. And people can put their questions. I think it has to be in writing, if not mistaken. Until someone else comes in, I would like to ask you, what do you see as the main challenges as we go forward in Greece and in Europe or in our region with regards to the upscale of harm reduction programs? Are there any particular circumstances in the last 1 or 2 years?
The major problem is funding. We all know that. Second thing, it's what we are being discussing about how to deal with it, Nikos, for many years. in the European networks, in the consultative bodies of the European Union, as the Civil Society Forum on Drugs, people like me are drug policy experts, well-respected individuals. Since we are in this kind of environment in Greece, sometimes we are nothing but drug users who have no, let's say, value. And this is very contradictory in our job. It is very contradictory also for my peers of the Drug User Union, which is exactly the same case. And we have to deal with people I call the gatekeepers, people who are trying actually to stop us from evolving in the public sphere, and also with the most, let's say, disgusting sample of professionals, which I call professional saviors, people that have nothing to do with our communities, with our values, with our way of work, but they appear from nowhere to build a career. In our case, which for me, it's unacceptable. It's different to have allies and different to have this kind of opportunistic individuals who just mingle and try, to build a career. I don't know if I covered you, Nikos.
We already have another question, and thank you, Maria. And actually, that would have been my second question. And a friend asks about, and he mentions, or she, I cannot tell, 7 years of waiting for an OST clinic. And here is the question as well. And also, what has been the collective advocacy in making sure that we have no more waiting lines? And if I can also add a question about this request for supervised injection, not supervised, safe injection places that we could use across Europe.
Sorry,
but first, also on the waiting lines of the OST.
Okay. First of all, to clarify, this is not the case anymore for the OST. The waiting list now, it's been reduced to some months, but there was also this kind of thing that if you were HIV positive, you could skip this 7 years, but you actually waited for like 7 months or something, which was not exactly, the most appropriate thing to happen to you. This is not the case anymore, but it was the case for Greece, for Athens, from the area of Athens, for many, many, many years. And people literally died waiting for that. And after so many losses that we could prevent, they changed it with very simple means. And actually, in my reading of things, the change did not need any kind of money or it was not such a big project. It was not such a big project to apply. It was just a very simple way of organizing the units together in hospitals. And I really cannot believe how they did not think about that in the previous years. So there was a problem of political will because OST stigmatized, and they didn't want these people to go to hospitals. That's it. That's the answer. So people died because of stigma.
If I can add, Mario, to this, I think that the HIV crisis was also something which expedited this. So we had a decentralization from 1 or 2 OST clinics to many clinics, as you mentioned. So I asked you about the safe injection places, but before that, perhaps there's a question from Naomi about the establishment of hospitality during the COVID for people who use drugs, and that was the first time to offer shelter for people who were homeless. It was not that's why I said it was a hospitality service rather than a full-scale hosting of people for long periods. But that's how is it still active? How is it going?
Look, that was one major point of our advocacy the previous years, because the housing facilities did not accept active drug users, homeless active drug users, for reasons you can imagine, but there are not the correct reasons. During the first wave of the pandemic, yes, there was the opening of the first shelter, or the first housing facility for homeless drug users. To be very honest about that, if the mayor of Athens did not have the political will, this could never happen. You know, it was actually a decision of the mayor of Athens and some specialized in the drug field people around him. Now, it opened like 2 or 3 days before another shelter for homeless drug users near the open drug scenes as the first one. What I have to say about that, to be very honest, is that a housing facility probably it's one of the most difficult projects. And I'm not talking only about drug users, I'm talking about any kind of housing facility. These facilities brought together in the same table and actually in the same field of work two very different treatment, let's say, approaches. Kethea, which is the major substance-free treatment in Greece, and Okana, who has the monopoly of OST. That's a good thing, because people, when are working together, even if they come from different, let's say, ideological positions for what is drug use, for what is addiction, they tend to learn from each other. And in this level of difficulty that this field has, people tend to be more united than divided, because we had all the previous years all this splitting between the programs, the doctors that work there, etc., etc. So, Naomi, if I can answer to your question, yes, of course, benefits the community, because also it's not just a house, it's not just an apartment. They have integrated services there, and they link people with multiple things, like HIV clinics, like the medication for hepatitis, like with mental health care specialists. So yes, we are on a good way about that.
Arya, we have another question about the experience through the Vancouver opioid overdose death crisis. And also there's a question about how do you balance what people want versus what politicians are willing and what do they allow to fund according to public acceptance. Perhaps you can also mention the example of the attempt of the Greek Okana, of the organization which provides OSC, to open a new service, and what was the reaction, and what was of the neighbors and the
that was the second shelter, and that's why I mentioned this kind of hostile committees of residents. That is the exact translation from Greek. That's how they call this kind of let's say fascist groups of people, that because they have a very specific racial narrative and far-right narrative. Anyway, first of all, I have to say that for us, Vancouver, it's kind of an ideal place. And what is going on in Canada, it's kind of always is an example for us. The question is very good, how we balance what our beneficiaries, what the community wants, and what politicians are willing to allow. In our case, HIV is our Trojan horse. We are always talking about public health safety, and all of these things are interconnected with public health safety, with the reduction of public nuisance, and also with human rights. That it is our trick regarding that. And thank you for the questions, and keep on the good work in Vancouver.
And what about naloxone and what we have? Tell us what is the crazy situation in Greece. Perhaps this is the case in other countries as well.
Yeah, we know that. Okay, naloxone is the distribution of naloxone is considered to be a medical act. That means that no one is allowed to access to Narcan or to injecting or to nasal spray of Narcan of naloxone, except if he's a doctor or medical personnel. That means our people are dying helpless in the streets. And we are trying for many, 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 many years, since I remember myself in the field, we are trying to advocate for the obvious, that the street workers, the peers, the drug users and their families have access to naloxone. We are going to achieve that, I'm pretty sure.
Thank you, Mario. If there are any other questions,
we can
if
close
not, yes, I would like to thank you very much, and thank you for having us here. And we look forward to working together in the various networks that the Positive Voice and Maria, where you participate. And we're certain that together we will be able to overturn the constant problem that we have with the people who are not convinced with the importance of harm reduction and more permissive laws on drugs.
Okay, and from my side, thank you all for being here, and we are totally on the same page.